The radio in the small diner was still playing music when Mary Ellen Carter vanished from Elmore, Oklahoma, population 1,224. The July evening draped a thick heat over the red dirt fields surrounding the town, the air heavy with the smell of dust and gasoline. At 9:12 p.m., the diner owner saw Mary, a 22-year-old library worker, stand up from her table, grab her notebook, and say she was heading home early to prepare for the next morning shift. Her green Chevrolet Nova pulled away from Main Street, gliding past the Conoco gas station, where the yellow light reflected off her face for the last time. The station attendant recalled Mary smiling, waving goodbye, before her car melted into the darkness toward Lake Arbuckle. As the night wore on and the Carter family's porch light stayed on, no one knew that road would never bring her back. What happened in the hours that followed would haunt Oklahoma for 43 years. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. Elmore City, Oklahoma, summer of 1970. The air of the American South was thick and heavy, as if cloaked in a haze of heat. Across the blooming cornfields, the chirping of crickets and cicadas mingled with the dry red earth scent, evoking a familiar, languid feeling of a long day nearing its end. On Main Street, only a few flickering neon lights cast their glow onto the dusty pavement. As small diners began to close, the hum of mosquitoes filling the dark. At the end of the street, the Main Street diner's door remained slightly ajar, where Mary Ellen Carter, the 22-year-old town librarian, was tidying her papers, smiling as she said goodbye to her friend, the waitress. Everyone knew Mary, the always neat, gentle, and punctual girl. In a place where everyone knew each other, her presence was as familiar as the church bell every Sunday morning. As she pushed the door open to leave, the diner's light reflected off her light brown hair. Mary climbed into her emerald green Chevrolet Nova, a small but shiny car her father had given her the previous year. She started the engine, its sound breaking the quiet night, then slowly pulled away from Main Street, fading into the darkness. They say the last time she was seen was as her car passed the Conoco sign at the small gas station, its dim light spilling onto the dusty road. After that, the road held only heat, wind, and silence. The night passed slowly, as if time itself hesitated in this small town. At the wooden house on the end of Cedar Street, Mary's parents sat in the living room, the porch light burning through the night, a habit they kept to guide their daughter home after late shifts. They waited, listening to the hum of insects, then the ticking of the clock. No sound of a car, no sign of her. As dawn spilled over the red soil of Garvin County, they began calling neighbors, friends, then the police. And when the desk officer picked up a pen to write the first line of the report, the ink touched the paper like the seal of a fate. Mary Ellen Carter, missing. That name sat neatly at the top of a thin report, among cold, silent lines of text, and there it would remain for 43 years. Just a few hours later, as the sun rose above the horizon, Elmore City awoke to a strange morning, not because of the church bell, but because of an unnatural silence blanketing every street. News of Mary Ellen Carter's failure to return spread faster than the morning church bell. In this town, where everyone knew each other, no one thought something like this could happen here. Sheriff Clyde Warren received the call while brewing coffee in his office, his hand freezing midair when he heard her name. Half an hour later, he was at the Carter house, where Mary's mother still sat in the living room with a cold teacup, her eyes fixed on the porch. Mary had never left without notice. She might just be lost, Warren said, his voice trying to reassure, but he knew well that in this small town, there was nowhere to get lost. That morning, he mobilized the entire force, 2 patrol cars, a miner's truck, and nearly 50 volunteers, farmers, lumber workers, even housewives who'd known Mary since she was a child. The Baptist church opened its doors for people to gather, chairs pushed against walls, a local map spread across a table, Mary's usual route circled in red ink. They split into groups, some carrying flashlights, others shovels, some holding her photo. By noon, pickup trucks rolled down Route 7, tires crunching over gravel. They passed through golden dry cornfields, over the dirt bridge to the south, then along the road to Lake Arbuckle, where Mary often stopped in the afternoons. The soil there was dark brown, sticky underfoot. The wind carried the damp scent of weeds, rippling across the mirror-like lake. The men leading the search flicked on flashlights, their beams cutting through the morning mist. Calls of Mary echoed, hitting the lake's surface before fading. No one answered, except the gentle lapping of small waves. By mid-afternoon, a woman in the group spotted something near the water's edge. A beige woman's sandal caught in tree roots, and a few steps away, a muddy handkerchief. They bagged them in nylon, handing them to Warren. He looked, nodded, but said nothing. Unwanted images stirred in his mind. The team spread out, scouring every patch of land, every bush, every small creek. A group of amateur divers was called in, bringing ropes and grappling hooks to probe the lake's depths. But there was nothing but mud and rocks. As the sun tilted west, a man living nearby mentioned he'd seen car headlights shining down the levee road the previous night before disappearing behind the trees. "I thought someone turned toward the lake," he said, his voice trembling. "But I didn't hear a crash." Warren jotted a few quick lines in his notebook, eyes drifting toward the water. No clear tire tracks, no glass fragments, no oil slicks. The road to the lake held only muddy patches and the boot prints of searchers. He told everyone to rest, lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the humid air. Above, clouds gathered, thunder rumbling from the south. When the first rain fell, heavy drops hit the lake, breaking its small ripples. Warren called off the search for the day, to resume the next morning. "Nothing so far," he said softly, his voice blending with the rain. Everyone fell silent, packing up lights and ropes. In the distance, Mary's father stood on the porch, staring at the road to the lake, where figures grew smaller in the rain. That night, Elmore City didn't sleep. Porch lights burned brightly, like candles lining the path of a funeral. No one dared name. In Sheriff Warren's journal the next morning, a single line, no sign of vehicle, no accident, missing without trace. And from that day, they say, Elmore's small map changed. Every road, no matter where it led, circled back to the lake. On the third morning of the search, Oklahoma's sky was a bleak sheet of steel, sunlight obscured by low clouds. The dirt road to Lake Arbuckle had turned to red mud after 2 nights of rain, forcing rescue trucks to stop nearly half a mile from the water's edge. Amid the squelch of mud under boots, young forensic technician Alan Pierce crouched to examine untouched patches of ground. He'd been assigned to Garvin County less than a year, fresh from state police training, with a promise to bring new methods to field work. But this small town, with only petty thefts each year, had never needed his skills until Mary Carter disappeared. Pierce walked along the low levee to the lake's shore. Footprints, tire tracks, and drag marks from ropes mixed chaotically from the previous day's frantic search. He headed east, where the grass remained untrampled, and began inspecting closely with a handheld magnifying glass. Amid the muddy soil was a deeper mark, a clear semicircle, not rounded like farm vehicle tires, but with small straight grooves. He knelt, carefully placed a ruler, and poured plaster into the mold. When the plaster dried, the pattern was unmistakable, a 4-inch tread, faintly etched with Goodyear Police Special. He paused, scanning the area. In Garvin County, only 3 vehicles used those tires, all police patrol cars. He marked the spot on the map, then continued along the embankment. A few meters away, under a small rock, he found a white paint chip, half the size of a thumb, its edge jagged as if from a hard impact. Pierce picked it up, placed it in a nylon bag, and labeled it Sample 3A East Bank. He looked around, the lake still silent, the wind carrying the tangy smell of mud and stagnant water, distant truck engines rumbling. Everyone assumed the girl had gone into the water, but a different feeling stirred in him. Something had been pressed down here, not slipped. Back at the temporary station near the church, he laid the tire cast on the table. Sheriff Clyde Warren was smoking by the window, his shirt mud-stained, eyes weary from 3 sleepless days. Pierce set the plaster mold and paint chip before him. "Sir, I think we have a suspect's tire mark. It's a Goodyear police special, only patrol cars use them." Warren glanced quickly, taking a drag. "Could be our vehicles from the search." "No, sir. This mark was under dried mud before the rescue team arrived. I also found a white paint chip, matching the color of a 1969 Ford Custom." Warren frowned, silent for a long moment. "Send it to the county lab, but keep it quiet. We can't conclude anything yet. If the press hears about police tire marks at the scene, I won't be able to maintain control." Pierce nodded, carefully packing the samples, but a restless unease grew within him. He knew. Keep it quiet meant burying it. That afternoon, he drove to the Garvin County Station, a 20-mile stretch of red dust. The makeshift lab was a small room behind an old warehouse, equipped with a microscope and a few solvent bottles. He cleaned the paint chip, placed it under the lens, and saw a silver undercoat, distinctive to Oklahoma State Police vehicle paint, an anti-reflective coating used since 1968. He documented meticulously, took Polaroid photos, and wrote a 2-page report. At the end, he underlined a tentative conclusion: high likelihood suspect vehicle is a 1969 Ford Custom patrol car. When he submitted the report, Warren had already left the office. On the desk was a cold coffee mug and a note: "Don't send to state, hold for further results." Pierce stood silently, looking out the window. Clouds were gathering again. The lake in the distance was shrouded in mist rising after the afternoon rain. That night, strong winds blew, and when another rain came, water rushed down the hill, flooding the low ground where he'd found the evidence. The next morning, when he returned to take more photos, everything was gone, covered by a fresh layer of mud. The tire mark, the paint chip, all washed away. He stood there, staring at the slick red road to the lake, feeling hollow. From a distance, Sheriff Warren approached, raincoat over his shoulders, voice hoarse. "It's all right, Pierce. If it was someone's mark, we'll find it again." Pierce didn't respond. He looked at the lake, where the headlights of that night's car had once reflected. Deep down he knew that again might never come. And from that moment, Mary Ellen Carter's disappearance began slipping from the grasp of those seeking the truth, along with her final traces, washed away in the Oklahoma summer rain. The next morning, as the search paused due to rain, Sheriff Warren moved to the first step of the investigation, retracing everyone who saw Mary on her last day. Elmore was so small that everyone's schedules were etched in the townsfolk's memories. No one thought asking a few questions could become a critical part of a case, until they realized everything stopped on that Saturday night. Warren's first stop was Lydia Hart, the Main Street Diner's owner. Her diner sat at the corner of Main Street, where Mary often stopped after work. Lydia wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes still shaken. "She sat at the table near the window," she said, her voice hoarse from sleeplessness. Mary smiled, had her notebook, talked about wanting to order new children's books for the library. Said kids were reading less this summer. She paused, recalling details. She ordered black coffee and apple pie, said she was heading home early to help her mom with dinner. No one was with her. When she left, she said goodbye like always, cheerful, gentle, nothing unusual. Warren jotted in his notebook, asking, "Anyone unfamiliar in the diner that night?" Lydia shook her head. "All regulars. It's a slow summer, everything normal." From the diner, Warren drove to the Conoco station at the end of the street, where dim lights spilled onto Route 7. The station owner, Raymond Ellis, was changing the gas price sign when the sheriff arrived. He nodded, wiping his old cap. "Mary stopped by around dusk. I remember because she always greeted me first. She filled her tank, paid cash, said she was a few miles from home. No one was with her, no one waiting." Warren pressed, "Did you see any other vehicles stop then?" Ellis looked into the distance, trying to recall. "Not sure, but I think a white pickup drove slowly across the road, then turned toward the hills. I didn't catch the plate. Thought nothing of it." Warren thanked him, noted it carefully, and turned away. Behind him, the Conoco sign swayed lightly in the hot wind. That afternoon, Warren and Pierce visited the small suburban house where Tommy Keene, Mary's boyfriend, lived with a roommate. Tommy opened the door, looking dazed. The 23-year-old mechanic at the town garage had a pale face and unshaven chin. Seeing the police, he muttered, "I knew you'd come." They sat in a cluttered living room, the smell of motor oil lingering on Tommy's sleeves. "We argued that morning," he said quietly. "Something small, about me forgetting to help her dad fix the roof. Mary was mad, said I wasn't responsible. But by afternoon, things were fine. I was at my friend Danny Collins' place from 4 till late. He and his girlfriend were there, they can confirm." Warren eyed him cautiously. "Did you talk to her again that day?" "No, sir. I thought she needed space. She never went far without telling someone, I swear." Pierce scanned the room, his eyes landing on a photo of Mary smiling brightly, taken at a picnic the previous year. She stood in the center, hair tousled by the wind, sunlight glinting in her eyes, a light unaware it was about to be erased by time. When Warren returned to his office that evening, he gathered the day's notes, arranging them in chronological order. Diner, gas station, road home. The final entry stopped at Route 7, no witnesses. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the creak of the ceiling fan overhead. No physical evidence, no witnesses, no motive. Only simple accounts floating in the air like mist after rain. Mary smiled. Mary filled her tank. Mary said she was going home, and then, no one saw her again. Outside, the sunset draped the town in red, coloring the low rooftops. At Lake Arbuckle, mist began to rise, obscuring the water's surface. In that twilight, a lone street lamp flickered on, illuminating the road Mary had taken, a road leading to nothing but silence. The day's statements, when pieced together, were like a puzzle missing its center. Warren knew this, and he also understood that without new leads, the case would soon become just another name in Garvin County's missing person files. A file he dreaded adding to. That night, he sat alone, rereading every line of his notes, smiling, carrying a notebook, a few miles from home. We argued that morning. All of it sounded so ordinary, too ordinary, eerily so. Ordinary was the last word used to describe the day before someone vanished, and in that ordinariness, something felt wrong. Something Warren couldn't name, but that Alan Pierce, the young technician, had sensed. Pierce stared at the map on the wall, the final red dot resting by Lake Arbuckle. A tiny mark amid the vast red landscape. Everything led back there, and in that place, only the water and silence knew what had happened to Mary Ellen Carter. The next morning, the sky was still cloaked in thick fog, sunlight piercing through thin, milky streaks over the cornfields. Sheriff Warren and technician Alan Pierce set out early, carrying a map and an old camera. They decided to retrace the exact route Mary Ellen Carter took that night, from the diner on Main Street, past the Conoco gas station, then along Route 7 toward Lake Arbuckle. The red dirt road stretched out, winding through gentle hills, dotted with old oak trees. Tires rolled over ground, still soft from rain, leaving thick mud tracks. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of rust and damp lake water from afar. "She must have taken this route," Warren said evenly, eyes fixed ahead. "Shortest way from town to home." Pierce nodded, jotting quick notes. He photographed each curve, every lingering puddle, and marked points of interest with small wooden stakes. As their vehicle neared the low hill overlooking the lake, Warren signaled to stop. He stepped out, boots sinking into mud, and studied the narrow road curving down to the levee. The soil here was dark red, mixed with gravel and protruding roots. If her car skidded, Warren said, it could have gone straight down this slope to the water. He pointed with a stick toward the incline leading to the lake. About a 30-degree angle, soft ground, no barrier. Rainy night, slick road. One wrong turn would be enough. Pierce stayed silent, stepping closer to the edge. He knelt, brushing aside fresh mud, searching for older marks. Beneath the surface were faint grooves, but he wasn't sure if they were from tires or just runoff. He snapped photos, then measured their depth. "No long skid marks," he said quietly. "If the car lost control, there'd be brake marks or deep grooves leading down. Here's just a short horizontal mark, like someone stopped and turned around." Warren looked at him, frowning. "What do you think?" "I don't know," Pierce replied softly. "It just feels off. A car going into the lake would have left slide marks. The ground here isn't torn up." They continued along the levee, around the lake. The water was clear and deep, its surface reflecting the heavy clouds above. Each step squelched in the mud. Pierce paused at a narrow bend with a view of the entire lake. He marked it on the map, scribbling in the margin. "No brake marks, unlikely accident." Warren returned to the car, opened his notebook, and wrote a preliminary report. He looked tired, wrinkles deep around his eyes. "We can't keep the town like this forever. They need answers, Pierce, and until we have something else. I have to treat this as an accident. The car could have slid into the lake, body and vehicle sunk deep, buried in mud. Simple, clean, and what they want to hear." Pierce looked up, hesitating. "Sir, there's no evidence of a crash. No brake marks, no oil, no glass." Warren sighed. "You're young, Pierce. Sometimes this job isn't about finding the truth. It's about keeping the town from falling apart because of it. Understand?" They stood there a while longer, listening only to the wind skimming the lake. In the distance, waterfowl took flight, leaving ripples spreading across the still surface. The scene was too peaceful to hint at a crime. Pierce looked down at his mud-caked boots, hands gripping his notebook tightly. He added one final line, "No evidence of skidding." Car stopped, not lost control. As they drove back, the afternoon shadows stretched across the road. Warren drove slowly, saying nothing. On the hill, wind stirred red dust, carrying the musty scent of earth. In the silent cab, the steady hum of the engine mixed with the scratch of Pierce's pencil on paper, small, firm words trying to hold on to something between them, truth and silence. By day's end, Warren filed his official report. Victim likely lost control on a slick road, plunging into Lake Arbuckle. Vehicle and body not yet recovered. Below it was his signature, bold, decisive strokes. But in Pierce's small notebook, he wrote a line no one else would read. No brake marks, not an accident. That night, Pierce returned to the scene alone, standing on the levee where cold winds swept through wet grass. Under the moonlight, the lake gleamed silver, still as if it had never swallowed anything. Pierce stared at the water, his distorted reflection wavering. Deep inside, an unease took root, that the girl hadn't been swept away by the water. Someone had made her disappear, and the only trace of the truth had been erased with the red mud on Route 7. 2 days later, when Sheriff Warren's preliminary report reached the county office, the atmosphere at the Garvin County Police Station grew heavy. The story of Mary Ellen Carter's possible accident calmed most townsfolk, but not Alan Pierce. He still believed something was off in the entire theory. The facts were too neat, too easy to accept. He needed a real link, something tying the traces on Route 7 to a specific person. And then he found it, not in the mud, but in the patrol roster for July 18th. In a thin file, among scrawled names of units, one stood out, bolded in pencil. Deputy Richard Kane, age 33, Deputy Sheriff, patrolling southern Garvin County, including the road to Lake Arbuckle. Pierce recalled that when he first read the file, Warren had glossed over the name without comment. But now, checking the shift log, he noticed something odd. Kane's patrol report ended at 7:35 p.m., nearly an hour earlier than usual. A note read, "Out of service, supper break." Pierce brought the paper to Warren's office. "Did you know Deputy Kane ended his shift early that night?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Warren looked at him, replying slowly, "Yes," he radioed in. "What's unusual?" "Sir, his radio went completely silent from 7:40 to 9 p.m. No recordings or signals during that time." Warren paused, then pushed the paper aside. "Patrol car radios break down often. Loose wires. You're new, you're not used to it." But why no repairs or log entry? Pierce pressed. This is the area where Mary disappeared. The radio blackout matches the time she left the gas station. Warren stared at him, longer voice lowering. Pierce, Kane's one of my men. 8 years here, no issues. If you're implying something, I'd advise caution. I don't want this turning into an internal witch hunt. The response shut every door. But for Pierce, it only sharpened his suspicions. He quietly left, took the file back to his desk, and opened the radio log from that night. The handwritten entries stopped abruptly at 7:39. The last line reading, Unit 12, out of service. That was Kane's vehicle code. Then a gap of nearly an hour and a half. Not until 9:03 did the log resume with, Unit 12, resume patrol. No location report, no details. That afternoon, Pierce requested to meet Kane, citing technical file updates. Kane's house sat on the east edge of town, isolated between rows of oaks, as plain as any other. Kane opened the door, tall, broad-shouldered, hair slicked back, his uniform hanging in the entryway. He gave a faint smile. Warren's technician, right? Come in. I'm fixing that damn radio. In the living room, the patrol radio lay open on the table, wires tangled. See, Kane said, I told Warren, this thing's always breaking. Lost signal that night, so I came home to fix it. Had dinner, then went back out. Pierce asked, keeping his tone calm. You live alone? Yeah, wife left last year. I ate with my neighbor, Bill Knox. He can confirm. Pierce nodded, jotting notes, but his eyes caught a faint white mark on the brim of Kane's police hat hanging on the wall, matching the paint chip from the lake. He said nothing, snapped a few photos of the radio, and left. That evening, Pierce met Warren again, reporting in detail. Sir, the radio might have been broken, but the mark on his hat matches the paint chip I found. I want to send the sample to the state lab for confirmation. Warren lit a cigarette. I told you, don't touch anyone in the department. I'll handle this. But what if he's involved? Pierce asked, voice rising. He was the only one in the area when Mary vanished. It's not a coincidence. Warren turned, eyes cold. Pierce, you're talking to your superior. There's no murder here, just an unlucky girl. I don't want to hear more. The door closed behind Pierce, but in his mind, the details began to connect. A patrol car losing signal when Mary disappeared. A man having dinner no one saw, and a white paint mark matching the police vehicle. He opened his small notebook, adding one final line. Richard Kane needs further checking. Outside, night fell slowly over the town. The radio from the dispatch room crackled faintly, blending with the hum of insects. The signal was steady, as if no gap had ever existed between 7:40 and 9 p.m. that night. But Pierce knew, in that gap, something had happened, and the man wearing the badge might be the only one who knew exactly what. Weeks after the final meeting between Alan Pierce and Sheriff Warren, the case of Mary Ellen Carter's disappearance began to sink. Like Lake Arbuckle itself, where people believed she had gone under. In the Garvin County Police Station, the latest newspapers carried only brief lines. Search concluded, likely accident. The townsfolk gradually returned to daily life, while the case file sat quietly on Warren's desk, awaiting a final signature to close it. Pierce didn't give up. He sent a supplemental report with photos of the tire cast and paint chip, but when he checked the evidence room for the original samples, the sealed nylon bags from days before were gone. On the wooden shelf, only a note, under re-examination. He asked the clerk, the evidence technician. Everyone shook their heads. No one knew who took them, no log of transfer. When he confronted Warren, the sheriff shrugged. Probably sent off already. Don't make a fuss. Sir, I labeled and signed those. There's no transfer slip. If evidence is missing, the report's invalid. Warren set down his pen, his tired eyes laced with warning. Pierce, you're too tense. You think someone here stole evidence? Don't forget, we're still on the same team. What team, sir? Pierce asked, voice trembling slightly. The one seeking truth, or the one keeping silent? The silence, after that question, stretched long, broken only by the ceiling fan's hum. Warren stubbed out his cigarette, leaning forward. "I'll be honest, Pierce. If you don't want to ruin your career, let me close this case. No car, no body, no evidence. We can't keep the file open forever on a hunch." 2 days later, Pierce received an internal transfer notice, temporary reassignment to evidence room support in Chickasha. No specific reason. He knew it was a way to push him off the path he was on. Before leaving the office, he quietly packed his things, taking his small notebook and a photocopy of the crime scene map, the only document he'd duplicated before the files were sealed. On that map, he'd circled a small spot by the lake where he found the police tire mark, with a handwritten note, "Kane." Meanwhile, Warren finalized the remaining paperwork. Alone in his office, he flipped through reports lacking forensic signatures, statements with unclear evidence sources. He stacked them into a yellow folder labeled Carter, Mary Ellen, 1970. On the final page, he signed a brief conclusion, "Missing person, presumed accidental." The ink sank into the paper, smooth as a verdict. That afternoon, Warren took the file to the county building's basement storage. The room was cold, smelling of damp paper and old wood. He placed the folder in a cardboard box, along with the neatly folded crime scene map. Once spread flat on the table during the early investigation, the map was now creased, its edges torn, red ink smudged in places. Warren looked at it for a moment, then sealed the box, taping it shut, and wrote one final line in slanted print. "File closed, February 1971. As he stood, the last light of day slanted through the narrow window, illuminating specks of dust in the air. Warren wasn't a callous man. He knew a family was still waiting somewhere, and the truth, if it existed, lay silent beneath that lake. But he also understood that sometimes a small town couldn't bear certain answers. "In the quiet," he murmured. As if to justify himself, justice can't help anyone if it tears everything apart. The storage room door closed, the lock clicking in the damp, cold space. In the corner, old case files were stacked like unmarked graves of the past. One of them, on the third row, bore the label, "Carter, Mary Ellen. Missing person 1970. Upstairs, the sky turned to dusk. Outside the window, Route 7 stretched on, silent as the months that passed without answers. At Lake Arbuckle, waves lapped gently at the shore, erasing old footprints. No one spoke of the disappearance anymore. Conversations in the coffee shop returned to crops and corn prices. Life went on, as if Mary Ellen Carter had never existed. Only Alan Pierce, in his temporary apartment in Chickasha, occasionally opened his old notebook. The final page still held the line he wrote the night before his transfer. No brake marks, not an accident. He stared at the faded words, then closed the book, tucking it into a drawer. He knew the case was never truly over. It was only folded away, like that map, lying in a silent box in the Garvin County basement, waiting for someone brave enough to open it again. After the Mary Ellen Carter missing person file was sealed, time did what it does best: buried everything in silence. Year after year, the Garvin County Sheriff's Office changed hands. The boxes in the old storage room faded, their black marker labels dulled by dust. No one asked about the young woman who vanished in the summer of 1970, just as no one remembered Alan Pierce, the technician who insisted it wasn't an accident. Elmore City quietly aged. The children who searched for Mary that year now had grandchildren, and Route 7 remained red with dust every time the wind blew. Pierce left Chickasha in the mid-1980s. After 20 years of service, he never rose high in rank or drew attention. People said he was too straightforward to be a cop in a small place like that. When he retired, he took only one thing that wasn't his: a copy of the crime scene map, the paper he'd photocopied before the original file was sealed. Folded twice, its edges worn, the pencil markings still clear. He kept it in an envelope, tucked inside an old Bible, not because he hoped to solve the case, but to remind himself that the truth had once existed, even if hidden. Sometimes, reading about new cases in the paper, Pierce thought of that young woman. He still made a habit of passing Lake Arbuckle whenever visiting friends in Paul's Valley. The lake was calm in every season, even more beautiful than before, with trees thickening along the shore and large fish surfacing at dusk. To others, it was a perfect fishing spot. To him, it was a scar. He always thought, somewhere beneath that mud, the answer lay silent. In the 1990s, Garvin County's files went digital. Hundreds of old cases were indexed, but long unsolved missing persons cases without bodies were merely marked unresolved. Mary Ellen Carter's name was mistyped once as Mary E. Carter, status closed. A small clerical error, but it nearly erased the case from search records. Time rolled on. In 2008, Pierce lost his wife and moved to a small house on the outskirts of Norman. He spoke little, living off his pension and the simple joy of watering his garden each morning. But at night, he'd open the old map on the kitchen table, the yellow light falling on the red-inked cane, the mark he'd scribbled long ago. It was a whisper that wouldn't fade, pulling him back to that red dirt road. The summer of 2013 brought something strange, the worst drought in decades. Lake Arbuckle's water level dropped over 10 feet, exposing cracked mud and long-dead tree roots. Locals said it was the first time they'd seen the lake's bottom. That same year, in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBA, announced a pilot program, the Cold Case Unit, dedicated to reopening unsolved cases using modern forensics and DNA technology. Pierce caught the news on the evening broadcast. Sitting in his chair, he listened to the anchor talk about last century's missing persons cases, potentially solved through science. He gave a faint smile, his eyes lingering on the ticker. Justice delayed, not denied. The slogan reminded him of Mary's gaze in that old photo. Weeks later, a state geological survey team was sent to Lake Arbuckle to measure water levels and assess erosion risks. They set up camp on the eastern bank, where Pierce had found the tire mark nearly half a century ago. When he heard, his heart raced like it did in his youth. He drove to the lake, standing on the edge of Route 7, looking down at the water that had receded to reveal strips of brown mud. He was no longer a forensic technician, but he carried the instinct of someone who'd seen the truth buried. Pierce picked up a stone, tossed it into the murky water, and muttered to himself, "Maybe it's time." Above, the August sun blazed, reflecting off the lake like molten steel. Across the water, surveyors in work gear were bending over something rising from the mud. He couldn't hear them, but by instinct, he knew, after 43 years, that lake was about to give back what it had held for half a century. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation Office, August 2013. In the ground floor records room, the smell of old paper and chalky dust from aging file boxes hung heavy dry as the summer outside. Detective Renee Wallace, 32, brown hair neatly tied, wearing black framed glasses, sat before a stack of old files reaching half her height. She was the youngest member of the Cold Case Unit, formed less than 6 months ago to review Oklahoma's unsolved missing persons and homicide cases. On her desk, each box held a forgotten life. The Moore Farm homicide, 1964, Stillwater runaway, 1973. Carter, Mary Ellen, missing person 1970. She paused at the last name. Something about it held her. A handwritten note in the corner of the file, Garvin County, file incomplete. The box was coated in thick dust, its rubber band crumbling as she removed it. Inside were a few yellowed black and white photos, a 3-page typed report, and a heavily folded map. Unfolding it, she saw pencil-drawn lines, numbered circles, search areas, Lake Shore, Route 7. On the right edge, a faded red ink note, Kane. Renee frowned. She was used to such notes, hasty scribbles from an investigator who believed they'd touched something but couldn't prove it. She checked the 1970 Garvin County personnel list, finding Deputy Richard Kane, sheriff's deputy, with a line below, retired, no record available. Everything stopped there. That afternoon, she brought the box to her unit chief's office. "Sir, the Carter case. It doesn't seem properly investigated. No forensic conclusion, no physical evidence, and the report lacks signatures." The unit chief, veteran agent Malcolm Reeves, looked up from his papers, smiling. "Renee, you're new to this. 70s missing persons cases are often just hunches and typos. But if you think it's worth it, follow it. We formed the cold case unit to dig into what others called hopeless." That night, Renee returned home late, spreading the map on her kitchen table. The shaky pencil lines, smudged ink from dampness, but the red cane stood out on the yellowed paper, stirring a familiar instinct. The feeling of standing before a secret buried alive. The next morning, she searched the 1970s Garvin County personnel records, finding another name tied to the case: Alan Pierce, technician. In the old personnel database, she was surprised to find his current address, Pauls Valley. A note from a retired sheriff's employee confirmed Pierce had been retired for years, living alone. She drove over an hour through barren fields to southern Oklahoma. Pauls Valley emerged like a sleeping town, empty streets, small wooden houses, leaning utility poles. Turning into the dirt lane listed in the file, she saw a faded white house with a tin roof, a hammock on the porch, and a rusty pickup. An elderly man with white hair was watering tomato plants with a hose. "Mr. Pierce?" she asked, stepping out and showing her OSBA badge. He looked up, gray eyes catching the sunlight, and nodded slowly. "I'm Detective Renee Wallace. I'm reviewing old cases, including Mary Ellen Carter's disappearance." The man set down the hose, silent for a moment. 43 years, he said softly. "I thought no one would mention that girl again. The file has a map with your name and a red ink note. Can you tell me what you remember?" Pierce studied her, a flicker of wariness in his eyes, then gestured to the porch, inviting her to sit. He poured 2 glasses of water, his hands trembling slightly. "I knew something," he said, voice low and hoarse. "But they wouldn't let me speak." "They who?" "The ones who signed off on closing the file. I was just a technician. I found things they didn't want to see." "What things?" He looked out at the distant fields, where sunlight burned on cracked earth. "Tire marks, a paint chip, and a name on the patrol roster. I wrote it on the map, but they folded it up, put it away, said I was too suspicious." Renee opened her notebook, scribbling quickly. "Do you have any copies?" Pierce stood, went inside, and returned with an old, worn envelope. Inside was a faded photocopy of the original map, its ink faint, but the red dot by Lake Arbuckle and Kane still clear. He placed it before her. "I've kept it nearly half a century," he said. "I don't know if it's worth anything now, but if you really want to know what happened, go to the lake. The water's receding. And sometimes, when the water drops, you don't just see the lake bed." His words sent a chill down her spine. She folded the map carefully, thanked him, and stood. As her car pulled away from the dirt road, Renee glanced in the rearview mirror. Alan Pierce stood on the porch, hand on a post, eyes following her. Something in his gaze felt like he'd lived his whole life waiting for this moment. On the drive back, wind carried the smell of dry earth and scorching sun across empty fields. In Renee's mind, old pieces of information stacked up: the map, the red note, the white-haired man, and the shrinking lake. She knew the case had just been reopened, not by administrative order, but because the past traces were rising from the ground, demanding to be seen. September 2013, the heat in central Oklahoma refused to relent, despite the calendar turning to fall. The drought had shrunk Lake Arbuckle daily, its water receding nearly 20 feet from the shore, exposing cracked mud, dead tree roots, and shriveled fish carcasses. Locals were used to seeing the lakebed emerge, but that morning, a state geological survey team noticed something unnatural. Around 8 a.m., as sunlight cut through the heat haze, a worker named Earl Thompson spotted a metal frame protruding from the mud, about 10 yards from the water's edge. At first, they thought it was fishing equipment or an old gate, but as they cleared the dry soil, the metal's curve became clear: a wheel rim, a door edge, a front bumper. "It's a car," Earl whispered, stepping back, heart pounding. Someone called the local police, and soon, the OSBA cold case unit arrived. Detective Renee Wallace stood on the shore, sweat soaking her collar. The sight before her took her breath away, a car frame half buried in mud, its silver paint turned to rust, but its shape intact. Forensic techs set up stakes to cordon the area, draped tarps for shade, and began clearing mud around the object. The stench of rusted metal and stagnant water filled the air. When the final layer of mud was removed, Renee saw a patch of pale turquoise paint, the exact color listed in the file for Mary Ellen Carter's 1969 Chevrolet Nova. "Wait," she said, bending to point at the rear. "Where's the license plate?" A technician brushed away fine dirt at the back. Faint characters emerged. "OK, 7C 2194. Renee flipped open her file to the last page. A typed line stood out. "Vehicle registration, 7C 2194. Chevrolet Nova, 1969. Turquoise blue." She took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. "That's Mary Carter's car." News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Local media swarmed, but OSBA sealed off the area. A professional salvage team was called from Norman. They rigged steel cables to a crane, wrapping them around the rusted frame, then slowly pulled it from the thick mud. The machine roared. Muddy water poured out. The wheels emerged first, followed by a crumpled door, shattered glass, and finally, the mud-caked hood. The scene fell silent as the heavy, decayed vehicle was dragged onto land after 43 years. Renee stepped closer, mask pulled over her nose. A technician pried open the door with a crowbar, the metal screeching. Inside, the seats were rotted, upholstery torn, but the seat frames still held floral fabric, hand-stitched from the 60s. In the glove compartment, they found a mud-caked leather wallet with a faded library card, bearing Mary E. Carter's name. No doubt remained. The front seat was empty, no trace of a body. But under the floor, in the caked mud, a technician found a small piece of dark red fabric, possibly from a dress or jacket. It was sealed immediately. A forensic examiner whispered, "No major crash damage on the front. Doesn't look like an accident." Renee didn't respond, her eyes on the right side door, the steel frame bent unnaturally, as if impacted from outside, or pushed. As the car was hoisted onto the shore, sunlight hit the rusted surface, casting strange reflections. The crowd stood silent. Some made the sign of the cross. A reporter tried to snap photos but was stopped. Renee stared at the car. Pierce's words echoing, "Go to the lake. When the water drops, you don't just see the lake bed." She wrote in her investigation log, "Vehicle recovered. Arbuckle Lake. Registration confirmed. Driver unknown, possible foul play." But deep down, she knew possible no longer applied. That afternoon, as the sun dipped, the car was loaded onto a flatbed, covered with a tarp, and sent to the Oklahoma City Forensics Lab. Renee stayed until it vanished from sight. Dried mud clung to her shoes, heavy as ash. She looked down at the murky puddle where the car had been pulled from. The mud still held the imprint of old tire tracks, mixed with workers' boot prints. The scene made her think of what Pierce might say if he were there. What lies at the lake's bottom isn't just scrap, it's a truth buried for half a century. Wind rose from the lake, carrying the smell of damp earth and metal. In the distance, the setting sun stained the remaining water a deep bronze, and in that dusk, Renee knew Mary Ellen Carter's disappearance was never just an accident. It was a story never fully told, and now, the car rising from the mud was a reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, could resurface. Oklahoma State Forensics Lab, September 21, 2013. The turquoise Chevrolet Nova sat in the center of the lab, its body cleaned of mud. Under white lights, every rusted detail gleamed like time scars. On the wall, a 3D schematic from a laser scan, OSBI's new system, used for the first time on a historical case, displayed the vehicle. Detective Renee Wallace stood behind glass, watching the monitor with the Forensic Reconstruction Unit. The 3D model, built from laser scans and spectrometry, showed every metal deformation precisely. The lead engineer pointed to the rear frame. "Look here, this deformation doesn't match a freefall crash." The dent angles at 15 degrees, with force applied directly from behind, nearly perpendicular to the car's axis. If it was an accident, the impact would angle downward, and the front ground would be torn up. It's not. So the car was pushed? Renee asked. Exactly. The force matches a truck or patrol car. About 3,500 pounds, moving at low speed, enough to knock the car off balance and into the lake without accelerating. The wheels were locked, no brake marks. The engine was likely off when it was pushed. Renee went silent. An image formed that summer night in 1970, the turquoise Nova stopped by the lake, taillights casting a faint glow, and from behind, another vehicle approached. Slowly, perhaps a county police Ford Custom. A brief shove, and Mary's car slid into the dark water. The team moved to the interior. During recovery, they'd preserved the cabin's mud to protect biological evidence. Removing the rotted seats, they found a sight that silenced the room among the black mud, faint white bone fragments mixed with fabric scraps. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Marta Velasquez knelt, gently brushing them aside, her voice calm. Female pelvis, small stature, age roughly 20 to 25. They used tweezers to collect each fragment, placing them in steel trays, cleaned with special solution. Small bones, a molar, a wrist joint, slowly took shape. Definitely female, Velasquez said. Intact section of hair, long, light brown. A technician opened a mud-filled bag from the passenger seat, pulling out a fabric-wrapped object, a small leather purse, its clasp rusted. Inside were a broken comb, a faded lipstick, and a waterlogged notebook. Renee, gloved, opened the notebook's pages, finding faint, smudged ink, but legible words. Library order, children's section, July 19th. She recognized the handwriting, matching the 1970 Elmore City Library file. It was undoubtedly Mary Ellen Carter's notebook. From the rear floor, a technician called out, "Metal object here." They shone a light, carefully extracting a rusted palm-sized circular piece. When cleaned, words emerged under the oxide. Garvin County Sheriff's Department. Deputy R. Kane. A warped but intact badge, number 1237 etched clearly. The room fell deathly silent. Renee stared at the metal, her throat dry. Everything Alan Pierce had said now stood vivid, as if time had rewound. "Verify its origin now," she said, voice low but firm. "Cross-check the number with 1970, Garvin County personnel records." A technician replied, "Preliminary check done. Only one person had this number, Richard Kane." Within hours, the scene was photographed and sealed. The badge was sent to chemical analysis. The first report confirmed the oxide layer formed in lake water over 40 years, meaning it was there since the disappearance. It couldn't have been added later. The next day, preliminary DNA results from the bone fragments reached OSBA. Cells extracted from intact femur marrow were compared to samples from Carter family relatives. When the printer spat out the results, the final line read, "Positive match, 99.998%. Dr. Velasquez removed her gloves, looking at Renee. "No doubt, it's Mary Ellen Carter." Renee stood frozen. She looked at the old car, now a steel grave. For 43 years, the truth lay just meters below the surface. Without the drought, it might have stayed buried forever. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was held at OSBA. Investigators, forensic experts, and district prosecutors attended. Renee presented the findings: the car's pushed trajectory, Kane's badge, Mary's remains, the DNA match. She concluded, the 1970 case wasn't an accident. This was intentional homicide, and the only evidence at the scene points to a Garvin County badge holder, Deputy Richard Kane. The room felt heavy as lead. An older officer, once under Warren's command in Garvin County, sighed softly. "I served under Sheriff Warren. He closed the case because no one wanted to believe one of our own could be involved. Kane left the force in 1971, citing heart issues, then disappeared." "Is he still alive?" Renee asked. "There's talk he moved to Amarillo, Texas. No one's confirmed." Renee jotted it down, her voice steady but her eyes glinting with resolve. "We'll find him. After 43 years, Someone has to answer for that girl. That evening, as the technicians left the room, she turned back to look at the car once more. The rust gleamed like dried blood under the dim lights. In the driver's compartment, where Mary's remains had lain, light reflected off the shattered glass, casting blinding streaks. She imagined Mary's final moment. The car stopped, silent, then coldly shoved into the darkness. On the table, the 3D model printout bore a technical note: impact vector 14.6 degrees, direction rear to front. Intentional propulsion, consistent with external force. She added in red pen, not an accident. Outside, light autumn rain began to fall, the first after the drought. The ground soaked, washing away dirt, as if stirring memory awake. In the patter of rain, Detective Renee Wallace knew the Mary Ellen Carter case, after 43 years, had officially reopened. No longer missing person, but homicide. And among the living witnesses, someone would have to face what they'd left at the lake's bottom. 2 weeks after the forensic results were released, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation formed the Carter Task Force, an interdisciplinary team of veteran investigators, forensic experts, and criminal intelligence officers. The case was officially upgraded to a homicide investigation, a deliberate killing in 1970, with the prime suspect, Deputy Richard Kane, Garvin County Sheriff's deputy at the time. All documents, files, reports, and old crime scene photos were transferred from Garvin County's storage to OSBA's Oklahoma City headquarters in faded yellow boxes. As the boxes were opened, the smell of mildewed paper and old tobacco rose, mingling with the air like the breath of the past. Detective Renee Wallace was assigned lead investigator. Beside her was Alan Pierce, now 65, the only one who'd touched the truth back then and wasn't allowed to speak. He sat in the investigation room, white light illuminating his lined face, hands trembling slightly as he flipped through old papers. "I thought I'd never see these again," he said softly. "This time, you'll get to speak," Renee replied, eyes fixed on the files. They began with the 1970 patrol report, the only surviving copy. Renee spread it on the table, each line typed on an old Olympia typewriter. Out of service, supper break 7:35 p.m., resume patrol 9:03 p.m. She looked at Pierce. "This is the gap." Pierce nodded. "That's when Kane's radio went silent. I told Warren the signal was out for over an hour and a half. But in this," he paused, pointing to the right corner of the paper, "someone altered it with blue ink. Look closely." Renee leaned in with a magnifying glass. Beneath faint blue ink, old black ink showed 7:39, resume patrol. Someone had shortened the signal gap from over an hour and a half to 4 minutes. She took a deep breath. Hand altered, no verification signature, no approver listed. Pierce froze, as if seeing a ghost from 4 decades ago. Warren never used blue ink, but his clerk did. They moved to the technical reports. Pierce's 1970 crime scene analysis, a blurry photocopy. The technician's signature line at the end was blank. Renee asked, "Did you sign it?" Pierce gave a dry laugh. "Sure did," signed, stamped, and handed it to Warren's desk. Next day it was gone. "This isn't my report." They retyped it, left the signature off. The note about the Goodyear tire mark was erased too. Renee marked in red, report altered, evidence omitted. Another find halted the team. The forensic report on the white paint chip, labeled 3A East Bank, matching Pierce's discovery, was never sent to the state lab as required. The file held a brief, 7-line memo, sample inconclusive. No further analysis. No analyst's name, no date. "Sounds like someone wanted it over quick," Renee said. Pierce nodded, voice hoarse. "Or someone was scared of the real results." Page by page, the files revealed a familiar picture, not an accident, but a systematic cover-up. Radio logs altered, technical reports retyped, evidence vanished, forensic signatures left blank. And all those gaps, from every angle, pointed to one name, Richard Kane. That afternoon, the team held an emergency meeting at OSBA's conference room. The whiteboard was scrawled with timelines: 7:15 p.m., Mary leaves diner, 7:25 p.m. Fills gas at Conoco, 7:40 p.m. Kane's patrol car radio goes silent. 8:05 p.m. Goodyear police special tire mark appears near Lake Shore. 9:03 p.m. Kane's radio resumes. This is the real timeline, Renee said calmly. And it's not a coincidence. Kane was the only one with a patrol car in the area. The tire matches the scene. Now we have 3D modeling, proving the victim's car was pushed from behind. No more doubt. A veteran investigator interjected, "What about Warren? He signed off on closing the case. Any evidence he knew?" Renee shook her head. "Not directly. But he left technical signatures blank, ignored reports, and archived the case without a body. Obstruction of evidence. If he were alive, he'd have to answer too. But our focus is Kane." The meeting stretched into the evening. They reviewed everything. Kane left the force in 1971. No clear medical records, moved 3 times, then vanished from the state. No death certificate, no proof he died. One agent was tasked with tracing family and old bank accounts, another with checking Texas traffic reports. As the room emptied, only Renee and Pierce remained. He looked at the whiteboard, voice choked. 43 years, and someone's finally reading these lines. "You know, Warren told me, sometimes this town can't handle the truth." Renee turned, eyes steely. "The problem is, the truth doesn't ask who can handle it. It just waits for someone brave enough to lift the lid." Pierce smiled, tired but relieved. "You'll really open it this time?" "Not just open," she said. "I'll let the light shine to the bottom." That night, leaving headquarters, Renee paused by the wall displaying old black and white photos of unresolved victims. In the 5th frame was Mary Ellen Carter, young, gentle smile, bright eyes. She touched the glass, whispering, "We're coming, Mary." Outside, autumn wind whistled through the streets, stirring dry leaves. In the quiet office, a light glowed on the Oklahoma map. A red dot blinking in Garvin County, active case. Carter, 1970. OSBA Technical Forensics Lab, first week of October 2013. Halogen lights shone on the disassembled Chevrolet Nova, its parts tagged with dozens of spectrometry sensors. Technicians in white hazmat suits worked silently, each handling a sample. On the main evidence table, bags labeled "Recovered from Arbuckle Lake" were neatly aligned. Detective Renee Wallace stood nearby, tracking each result printed from the analyzers. Across the table, Alan Pierce sat quietly, hands on a pencil, as if afraid he'd tremble hearing what he'd waited 43 years for. The lead technician spoke first. "We've completed Raman spectroscopy on the paint adhered to the Carter car's rear." A large screen displayed 2 light-wave graphs, nearly identical. One was the white paint from the Chevrolet, the other from a 1969 Ford Custom Patrol Car archive, used by Garvin County's entire force in the 70s. Result, 99.7% chemical match, specifically, the lead oxide ratio and silver anti-reflective coating, unique to 1969 Oklahoma police vehicles. Renee asked slowly, "So the paint on Mary's car came from a patrol car?" "No doubt. The skid marks show the Ford's front hit the Chevrolet's rear, with enough force to break the back bumper, but not the frame. The paint even bears the imprint of the Ford Custom's crossbar grille." Pierce held his breath. He recalled 1970, the dirt road, the Goodyear police special tire mark, the white paint chip on a rock. He'd been right. Next was the fabric analysis. A young forensic tech opened a nylon bag, labeled 5B, containing a beige fabric scrap from the Carter car's floor, just over an inch long, frayed and caked in dry mud. Under the microscope, the cotton-nylon blend, now grayish, was clear. The tech compared it to a textile chart of Oklahoma sheriff uniforms from the Justice Museum. The screen showed fiber match, 100% consistency with Oklahoma Sheriff Department khaki uniform. Renee leaned against the table, breathing deeply. Could have come from the attacker's uniform during impact or pushing the car. Pierce added, voice thick, "I've seen that fabric. Their uniforms had beige trim, not gray." Kane wore that kind, always iron sharp as a blade. Renee looked at the tech. Can we get DNA or cells from the fabric? Unlikely, the tech replied. Too long underwater. But if there's latent prints or sweat, new protein separation tech might find biomarkers. We're trying. She nodded, then placed a hand gently on Pierce's arm. The evidence you preserved is confirmed. They can't deny it anymore. Pierce pursed his lips, eyes on the white paint sample. I told Warren it was police car paint. He said, don't dig deeper, now it's speaking for me. That afternoon, the radio signal team presented the final piece. They'd recovered analog radio logs from Garvin County's archive, a decayed tape with faint signal noise. Using old mechanical clock logs and 1970 astronomical eclipse data for time calibration, they aligned signal gaps. The results stunned the room. Unit 12's radio went silent at 1942 and resumed at 2104. Mary Ellen Carter was last seen leaving the Conoco station at 1935, expected home before 20 o'clock. Kane's signal gap perfectly matched Mary's disappearance. A data investigator concluded, no technical reason for a radio blackout that long unless manually disabled or disconnected. Renee folded her arms, staring at the screen. He turned off the radio. He didn't want his location recorded. Pierce nodded slightly. Or anyone to hear the water break when the car went under. The day's summary report printed clearly. 1. Paint matches 1969 Ford Custom, Kane's patrol car. 2. Fabric matches 1968, 1972, Oklahoma Sheriff uniform. 3. Radio blackout aligns with Mary Carter's disappearance. Conclusion: Deputy R. Kane's direct involvement extremely high. That evening, Renee brought the report to the OSBA director's office. Reeves read slowly, then set it down, looking at her over his glasses. You've proven what Garvin County hid for half a century. But now the harder part begins, finding Kane. He might have changed his name, moved states. But there's a trail. No one vanishes completely, Renee replied. Reeves nodded. Good. Carter Task Force is authorized for federal investigation. I want all data sent to the FBI for genetic tracing. If he's alive, we'll drag him out. Leaving the office, Renee paused in the hallway. Pierce was waiting, holding an old cap. They believe you now, he asked. They don't need to believe me, she said. The evidence speaks for itself. Pierce gave a tired, relieved smile. 43 years, and finally, the numbers side with humanity. That night, cold wind blew from the south. Above, dark clouds stretched into thin wisps. In the lit office, the whiteboard held 3 final lines: paint, match; fabric, match; signal, match. Below, Renee wrote in red, no accident. Officer involved homicide. She set the pen down, whispering to herself, no more doubt, Mary. Now we just need to find him. Mid-October 2013, the Carter Task Force shifted from technical to witness phase. Pieces of the 1970 story emerged, but one thing was missing. Someone who saw Richard Kane that night. Physical evidence was the foundation, but a witness, a real person who saw it, could bring it all to light. In Garvin County's old archive, while reviewing 1970 community reports, Renee Wallace found a forgotten form in the Arbuckle Lake noise complaint. July 18, 1970 file. The yellowed paper had a scrawled note. Heard car around 8, saw lights on lake shore, voices talking. J. Brantley. No follow-up, no interview, no further notes. Renee circled the name James Brantley. Records showed he lived in a wooden house half a mile from the scene. If alive, he'd be over 70. The residency database listed a James L. Brantley, 72, still in Ardmore, less than 40 minutes away. The next afternoon, Renee and Pierce set out. Oklahoma's late fall was milder, wind carrying the smell of dry grass and field ash. Pulling into the dirt road to the old house, they saw a thin, white-haired man on the porch, a wooden cane beside him. He looked up as they approached, eyes wary and tired. Mr. Brantley, that's me. Who are you? Renee showed her OSBI badge, speaking softly. "I'm Agent Wallace. We're investigating Mary Ellen Carter's 1970 disappearance. I believe you saw something." James Brantley was silent for a long moment. He looked toward Lake Arbuckle in the distance, where sunlight shimmered on the shallow water. 40 years, he said. "I thought that'd never come back." "What did you see?" He swallowed hard, voice raspy. "That night, I was by the back fence. My dog wouldn't stop barking. Looking toward the lake, I saw car lights hitting the water. 2 cars, one light-colored, maybe green or silver, parked by the levee. The other, white, bigger, stopped right behind. I heard a car door slam, then a man's voice. Familiar. I think it was Deputy Kane. Everyone around here knew him, right?" Renee felt her heart tighten. "You're sure it was Kane?" Brantley nodded slowly. "Sure." His badge caught the light. He was in uniform, that beige one, not civvies. A young woman with long hair was with him. I couldn't see her face, but when the light swung, she looked scared. She held something, maybe a bag. Then what happened? He took a deep breath, gripping his cane. I heard Kane yell something, then a crash, like something heavy hit a car. The girl stepped back, he moved forward. Then I heard her car's engine start. But right away, the other car's headlights blazed, and I heard metal clash. A short, hard hit. The smaller car slid, then a big splash. After that, just silence. None of the 3 spoke, only the wind through the trees, carrying damp earth scent. Renee finally asked softly, "Why didn't you report it?" Brantley lowered his head, voice heavy. "Next morning, I went to the station," told Warren. He listened halfway, then said, "Maybe you dreamed it. The lake's dark at night." A week later, Kane came to my house, stood by the fence, spoke low. "You shouldn't talk about that night. The girl's gone." "Got it." He touched his gun. "I had a wife and kids then, so I stayed quiet. Quiet for 40 years. Pierce inhaled sharply. "And now you're speaking?" "I'm old now," Brantley replied. Eyes sad. "Nothing left to lose, and the water's down. That girl deserves to come ashore." Renee opened her recorder, asking to log his statement. He nodded. When it was done, she asked, "Can you recall the exact time you saw those lights?" Brantley answered slowly, "Around 8. I remember 'cause I just heard the weather report on the radio. Said a storm was coming from the north." The words stopped Renee cold. She recalled the tech team's recovery of July 18, 1970, weather radar data. A small storm front swept through the Arbuckle Lake area at 8:03 p.m., causing anomalous electromagnetic signals on national radar. It matched Brantley's account perfectly. The next day, the Carter Task Force verified the statement by cross-referencing Brantley's house location and lake view with 1970 topographic maps. From his back fence, the levee where Carter's car was found was unobstructed. The tech team used light simulation modeling, proving that with the Ford's headlight angle, someone there could clearly see figures by the shore. The official report concluded, witness James L. Brantley's testimony is credible. Observation aligns with July 18, 1970 weather radar data. High likelihood he directly witnessed actions leading to Mary Ellen Carter's death. Late that afternoon, Renee returned to thank Brantley. He shook his head, eyes distant toward the water. "You know, that night the lake was so still. When the car sank, I thought I heard someone call, or maybe just the wind. I don't know, but now, when it rains, I hear it again." Renee stood still, wind tangling her hair. The western sky burned red at dusk. 43 years, and someone finally dared recount what they saw, what a whole town tried to forget. In her heart, she knew this wasn't just testimony, it was the final piece linking the truth. That night, July 18, 1970, by Lake Arbuckle, Richard Kane stood with Mary Ellen Carter before her car vanished beneath the water. OSBA DNA Lab, early November 2013. The room was fully sealed, white lights reflecting off stainless steel tables. Evidence bags, numbered and sealed, sat under glass. The air was silent save for the hum of the filtration system. On the screen, endless strings of characters, DNA sequences from samples in Mary Ellen Carter's Chevrolet Nova. Detective Renee Wallace stood beside lead forensic scientist Dr. Clara Matthews as she presented results. We extracted a minute amount of DNA from the car's floor behind the driver's seat near the door handle. Though most was degraded from water, enough remained for mDNA, mitochondrial DNA, analysis. Renee asked, "Is it the victim's DNA?" Clara shook her head. "No. The sequence differs. We compared it to Mary Carter's profile. No match. But it aligns with the profile of Richard Kane Jr., 38, living in Amarillo, Texas." The room's air thickened. Pierce looked up, eyes disbelieving. "Kane's son?" "Correct," Clara continued. "Mitochondrial DNA passes through the maternal line, so this match proves the sample came from someone in the same maternal lineage as Richard Kane Jr., meaning Richard Kane Sr. Renee's heart raced. She looked at the printed report. mDNA partial match, 99.94% similarity with maternal lineage of R. Kane Jr. "Could the sample be contaminated?" she asked, knowing the answer. Clara shook her head firmly. "Impossible. The DNA was in the seat crevice and under the door handle, touched only by the driver or someone in the driver's seat. Plus, the sample's grease matches compounds on hands handling weapons or machinery, fitting a patrol officer's profile." Pierce gave a bitter smile. The smile of someone seeing truth finally surface. "I told them in '70, only someone in the force would touch that car." Renee placed a hand gently on his shoulder, then turned to Clara. "So we have mDNA matching Kane's maternal line, found in the victim's car. This is officially suspect identifying evidence." Clara nodded. "No doubt." That afternoon, Renee presented the results at a Carter Task Force special meeting. On the screen, 3 key pieces of evidence, circled in red. Paint matches 1969 Ford Custom, Kane's patrol car. Fabric matches 1968, 1972, Oklahoma Sheriff uniform. Maternal line, originating from Kane Sr. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. This is no longer a guess. Richard Kane, Garvin County deputy, directly interacted with the victim's car. The DNA in the driver's compartment confirms he was at the scene. With Brantley's testimony and technical data, we have a homicide by a police officer covered up for 43 years. The room was silent. A young investigator asked softly, "Is he still alive?" Renee replied, "Federal tax records confirm a Richard S. Kane, 76, living in Amarillo, Texas. No death record. He's the father of Kane Jr." The state prosecutor's representative spoke, "To extend jurisdiction to Texas, we need a federal surveillance and investigation order. I'll request it urgently." Renee nodded. "While waiting, I want a tech team monitoring Kane Jr. S accounts, phone and movements he may be in contact with or shielding his father." That night, OSBI sent a cooperation request to the FBI's Dallas field office. A temporary surveillance order was signed at 2345, subject, Richard Samuel Kane Sr., probable cause homicide involvement. All bank, medical, and phone data for both father and son were placed under 30-day surveillance. In the dark office, Renee looked through the glass window at Oklahoma City's yellow lights. Beside her, Pierce sat quietly. He'd followed this case for nearly half a century, and now it was nearing its end. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slightly. "Fine. I didn't think I'd live to see this evidence. DNA, just tiny strands, enough to topple lies." Renee smiled faintly, then turned back to the desk, signing the investigation expansion request. "Truth has a better memory than people, Mr. Pierce. We just help it speak." 3 days later, the first surveillance report arrived. Kane Jr. lived in suburban Amarillo, a car mechanic with no criminal record. But oddly, over the past 6 months, he'd made multiple small transfers to an account under R.S. Kane, registered with an old ID. That account matched a small wooden house in the Texas Panhandle, where suspect Richard Kane Sr. might be living under an alias. Renee read the report, her chest tightening. After 43 years, a DNA thread thinner than a hair had traced the man who once wore a badge, trusted to protect a small Garvin County town. Now the evidence spoke clearly. That man was Richard Kane, and he was still alive. She wrote the final line in her investigation log. Trace DNA in the car matches mDNA of Richard Kane Jr. S. son. Confirms internal suspect. Recommend federal surveillance and issuance of arrest warrant. Setting the pen down, she looked at the old photo of Mary Ellen Carter on the desk. Clear eyes, gentle smile. 43 years, Mary, she whispered. And now he'll hear your voice. Outside the window, Texas wind blew in, carrying the dry heat of the desert. In the office's lamplight, the DNA report lay open on the table, the final line standing out like an indictment. Confirmed familial DNA link. Richard Samuel Kane Sr. At last, the truth had taken shape, and it bore the name of the man who once wore the badge. 3 weeks after the mitochondrial DNA results were confirmed, the Carter Task Force launched an operation codenamed Echo Lake. The direct surveillance phase of the suspect. After reviewing accounts and addresses in Amarillo, the team discovered that Richard Kane Jr.'s transfers weren't limited to one recipient. One recurring transaction, $500 monthly, was sent to an account registered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, under the name R.S. Keene. Upon checking the Social Security number, the team confirmed it was an alias, and the person renting a small apartment in Tulsa's southern suburbs was Richard Samuel Kane, 76. Former Garvin County deputy, missing since 1971. Renee Wallace stood before the large board in OSBA's operations room, where surveillance photos were pinned. An elderly man with white hair, slightly stooped, still carrying the gait of someone who once wore a uniform. He's not running, she told the agents. He's lived too calmly, as if the world forgot his name. On the afternoon of November 12th, 2 undercover investigators began monitoring the apartment. Kane lived alone, kept to himself, leaving each morning at 7:30 to buy a newspaper and coffee at a corner shop. He drove an old white Ford Ranger, parked close to the curb, always carrying a faded Garvin County police cap with its badge still attached. Over a week, the team collected behavior patterns, routes, and household trash. On the 18th, Special Agent Troy Heller was authorized to access the building's dumpster, per indirect evidence protocols. Inside a trash bag, labeled Kane's, were a toothbrush, a paper coffee cup with cigarette stains and saliva on the rim, and a few tissues. All were sealed and sent to OSBA's forensics lab that night. 2 days later, as results flashed on the screen, Renee and Pierce were in the lab. Dr. Clara Matthews, who handled the mDNA, entered with a thick file. We extracted full nuclear DNA from the toothbrush and coffee cup. This doesn't just confirm the maternal line, it directly identifies the donor. She placed the report on the table, voice firm. The DNA matches 100% with the trace sample from Mary Ellen Carter's Chevrolet Nova. No margin for error. Richard Samuel Kane was in the victim's car. Pierce sat silently. He stared at the bolded text, like it was a verdict on the past. 43 years, just him and that badge, he said softly. And now, that badge will put him in prison. Renee didn't speak, only nodded, her eyes lingering on Mary Ellen Carter's photo on the wall. That afternoon, a federal arrest warrant was submitted to the Northern District of Oklahoma Court. Judge Eleanor Richards signed it at 1642 after reviewing a 200-page file of technical evidence, Brantley's testimony, and DNA results. The warrant's final line read clearly, "Warrant for arrest, Richard Samuel Kane, for the murder of Mary Ellen Carter, July 18, 1970. That evening at OSBA headquarters, Renee held a final briefing before action. A Tulsa map was spread out, a red dot marking Kane's apartment. "We move at 6 a.m., she said. "No noise, he's old, but he once carried a gun. Stay cautious." Pierce stood at the room's back, holding his old notebook. He spoke up, "When you take him, let me be there. I want to look in his eyes, just once, to know why he did it to that girl. Renee looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You'll be there. But only after we've secured him. Early morning, August 22nd, 2013. Tulsa's sky was cloaked in gray clouds. Pale light filtering through light rain. On a quiet southern city street, an unmarked convoy stopped silently like shadows. It was a joint OSBI and FBI Dallas field office team, deployed at dawn under arrest warrant OK 130472, signed by Judge Eleanor Richards. Detective Renee Wallace stood behind the command vehicle's door, radio in hand, voice steady and firm. Alpha, confirm target. Beta, ready at the rear. Proceed on my count to 3. Ahead, 4 agents in bulletproof vests hid guns under jackets. The upper floor of Kane's rented building glowed faintly, cigarette smoke drifting from a cracked window. 5:43 a.m., no one spoke. Only the wind rattled a metal door. 3, 2, 1. The door was forced open, hinges snapping. Shouts echoed. Oklahoma State Police. Richard Samuel Kane, you're under arrest. The white-haired man in pajamas stood frozen in the living room. He didn't resist, only raised his head, cloudy eyes scanning as if he'd long awaited this moment. 2 agents pinned him to the floor, cuffing his wrists with steel. One read clearly, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." Renee stepped in, eyes locked on Kane's face. "You know why we're here," she said softly. He gave a faint smile, voice raspy. "I figured it's about that library girl. I thought after all these years, no one would remember her name." "We remember," Renee replied, voice hardening. "And now you'll answer." As agents led him to the vehicle, OSBA forensics began searching the apartment. The small, tidy room bore the rigid order of someone once disciplined by service. On the wall hung an old framed photo of 4 men in Garvin County police uniforms. Kane stood center, face stern, badge gleaming silver. In the closet, behind old shirts, they found a beige police jacket folded in a nylon bag. When opened, it released a musty, rusty smell. Light hit the collar, revealing a dark brown stain, dry and rough like old blood. Renee, gloved, carefully folded it into an evidence bag. "Label it 21A, she told the technician. "Send it straight to DNA." Kane was escorted to the car. As the door closed, he tilted his head toward Renee, cloudy eyes glinting with something strange, not fear but almost relief. 2 hours later, at OSBA's Central Forensics Lab, the jacket was opened under sterile glass. Dr. Clara Matthews' team processed the dried blood. Hours later, results showed DNA on the collar matched Mary Ellen Carter's 100%. No room for doubt. OSBA Interrogation Room. Oklahoma City, August 24, 2013. Fluorescent light glared down on the cold steel table, reflecting Richard Samuel Kane's haggard face. His wrists were loosely cuffed in front, white hair disheveled, orange jumpsuit wrinkled. Across from him, Detective Renee Wallace set down a thick file, each page a piece of 43 buried years. A small camera in the corner recorded. Renee began calmly, "Mr. Kane, this is a formal interrogation." Recorded. "You've been read your Miranda rights and have counsel. Do you wish to speak?" Kane shrugged, eyes dull on the camera. "I've got nothing to hide. Ask away." Renee activated the recorder. "On the night of July 18, 1970, were you at Lake Arbuckle?" "No, I was patrolling West Garvin. Around 7:30, I went home for dinner. My car radio was broken. Anyone confirm that?" "My neighbor Bill Knox. He's still alive?" "Ask him." "We did. Knox died in 1999. But your radio log shows your signal was out from 7:42 to 9:03. How do you explain it breaking exactly when Mary Carter vanished?" Kane smirked, a weak smile. "I don't know who she was. That girl, I vaguely recall her. Might have seen her at the Conoco station. Maybe helped her with gas. she asked. I helped. That's it. Renee leaned in, voice steady but eyes sharp. You helped her with gas. The station clerk said she drove up, paid, and left alone. No one with her, no one with a badge. Kane shrugged. Old man's memory ain't great. I just recall bits. Pierce, behind the one-way glass, clenched his fists. The man he'd suspected his whole life sat feet away, still calm, still trying to steer the story. Renee pressed. Then why does white paint from your car match 99.7% with paint on her car's rear? You talking about my old Ford? Sold it in '71. Someone probably hit her after. Not possible. The paint oxide proves the cars collided with original coatings. Only Garvin County's 1969 patrol cars had that type. Civilian cars didn't. Kane leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Your tech stuff. I don't get it. I'm just an old cop. Renee opened a photo file, flipping to the police jacket from his home. You'll get this, she said, sliding it toward him. Your jacket. And this is the test result. Mary Ellen Carter's DNA on the collar. Kane glanced at the photo, eyes flickering briefly. You know, he said slowly. Back then, we shared locker rooms. Could have got blood from someone else, some other case. Old stuff. No, Mr. Kane, Renee replied. This isn't old stuff. Records show you got a new jacket in June 1970. No other cases involve blood from a woman matching Mary Carter's type. Want to keep lying? He gave a dry chuckle, lips trembling. You young folks trust numbers over real people. I didn't kill anyone. I helped her with gas. Maybe talked to her, but nothing else. Renee shifted tactics. She opened the investigation timeline printout. Each hour marked 7:15. She leaves the diner. 7:25. Gases up at Conoco. 7:42. Your car radio goes silent. 8:03. Radar picks up a light storm over the lake. 8:05. Witness James Brantley sees you and a woman by the lake. 9:03. Your radio resumes. Next morning, she's gone. Tell me, were you there? Kane stared at the paper, then at her, cloudy eyes glinting with old arrogance. I told you. I don't remember. Lots of folks could have driven a car like mine. Brantley's old, could be wrong. Renee tilted her head. You think he made it up? He described you. Uniform, build, voice, all matching. And he recalled your car's headlights hitting the lake. No one could invent that precisely. A brief silence. The room's clock ticked eerily loud. Kane sighed, voice softer. You don't get it. The whole town wanted it gone back then. Warren too. If I didn't do it, someone else would have. Renee leaned forward. Warren knew. He ordered it. Kane went silent, eyes darting away. The air thickened. I'll ask again, Mr. Kane. Did anyone else in the department know? Warren? He looked straight at her, voice hoarse. You think locking me up ends it. You don't know the half of it. Then tell me, Renee replied, lowering her voice. Tell me so I can hear. Kane clenched his hands, nails scratching the table, eyes shifting from defiance to emptiness. He turned to the wall, where the camera sat. I'm done talking. Subject refused to continue. Renee sat still for a moment, then signaled to stop the camera. In the observation room, Pierce dropped his head into his hands. 43 years, and the man he'd chased still used the same trick, silence. But this time, Pierce knew that silence hid nothing anymore. As agents led Kane out, Renee stood, gathering the files. A young agent whispered, he won't confess. She replied, he doesn't need to. The truth already spoke. In the long hallway, Kane's footsteps echoed slowly, dragging with the clank of chains. He glanced back at Renee over his shoulder. You think justice is worth waiting 43 years for? She answered. Justice doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to arrive. Kane gave a toothless chuckle, then lowered his head and shuffled on. After the cell door closed, Renee sat back at the table, looking at the open file. On the final page, her note stood bold. Subject denied involvement, offered inconsistent statements regarding time and location, refused to answer when presented with badge recovered from vehicle. Session terminated at 14:26. Subject refused to continue. Outside, rain fell harder. Pierce stepped in, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did good. He can stay silent, but the blood speaks. And now, it's spoken for that girl." Renee nodded slightly. The lamplight reflected off the steel table, illuminating wet ink. "No more hiding underwater, Kane." On September 2, 2013, 10 days after the final interrogation, the Oklahoma Attorney General's office formally indicted Richard Samuel Kane, 76, former Garvin County deputy, for first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. The 143-page legal document marked the end of 43 years of silence and opened the final chapter of one of the state's oldest cases. At a morning press conference, State Prosecutor Margaret Dwyer, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a steely gaze, stood before dozens of reporters. On the podium was Mary Ellen Carter's photo, 1970. The 22-year-old smiling in her library uniform, eyes bright but distantly sad. Dwyer spoke slowly, each word clear. "Today, the state of Oklahoma charges Richard Samuel Kane with the murder of Mary Ellen Carter on the night of July 18, 1970. He abused his authority, using his patrol car and police uniform to deceive the victim, then killed her and concealed the crime for 4 decades." Below, Renee Wallace and Alan Pierce stood quietly with the investigation team. As camera shutters clicked, they didn't look at the lenses, both gazed only at Mary Ellen's photo, as if she were witnessing her own day of justice. The indictment began with a summary: DNA evidence, witness testimony, technical data, and internal records prove that between approximately 1940 and 20 o'clock on July 18, 1970, suspect Richard Samuel Kane was at Lake Arbuckle, Garvin County, with victim Mary Ellen Carter. The suspect used a 1969 Ford Custom patrol car to push the victim's vehicle into the lake, causing her death, then concealed evidence, using his authority to block investigation. The file pieced together 100% DNA match, 3D technical report proving intentional collision, paint and fabric matching police uniforms, and James Brantley's testimony of seeing Kane with Mary by the lake that night. The motive and circumstance section stated clearly: motive includes 1. Abuse of authority to approach local women, 2. Harassment and rejection by the victim, 3. Fear of being reported, leading to murder and cover-up by staging a traffic accident. Renee read that line in the prosecutor's office, her hand clenched. She recalled Kane's look during interrogation: no remorse, just cold defiance. "He didn't kill out of anger," she said softly, "but because he thought he had the right." Pierce nodded, voice hoarse. "Exactly. In that town, a badge once meant untouchable." At the preliminary hearing on September 6, Kane was brought to Oklahoma County Court under tight security. Reporters packed the hallway, while outside, dozens of locals carried white flowers, not for the defendant, but for the girl known only through news: Mary Carter, the girl who vanished. Inside the courtroom, Kane sat behind a wooden barrier, hands trembling but eyes cold. When the judge read the charges, he said only 4 words: "I am not guilty." His voice was raspy, choked, but fearless. Prosecutor Dwyer stood, presenting a 14-point summary of the indictment. Her voice was steady. "DNA from the victim's car matches the suspect 100%. Paint on the victim's car matches Garvin County's patrol vehicle. Beige fabric matches police uniform. Witness Brantley's testimony confirms Kane and victim at the lake. Radio log was altered. 1970 technical report was falsified. Suspect's police jacket contains victim's blood. Evidence of authority abuse, harassment, and cover-up." Renee watched each piece presented, recalling every investigation stage, from the old map Alan Pierce gave her to the car rising from the mud under drought sun. Each piece now a stone in the indictment's wall. When the prosecutor reached motive, she quoted a 1970 local witness, stating, "Kane often pursued Mary Carter, though she refused. He appeared multiple times at the library where she worked." Combined with Kane's patrol schedule, it showed he left his post without reason twice the week Mary vanished. Kane sat still, unresponsive, only tapping a finger on the table. His court-appointed lawyer, requested a delay to review the file, but the judge denied it. The prosecutor concluded, "This is not just a murder case, but a case of betrayed trust. A man entrusted with a badge, tasked with protecting justice, used that symbol as a tool for crime." Mary Ellen Carter was not just a victim, she is proof that justice may be delayed, but never lost. As the court recessed, Pierce stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall. Renee joined him, handing him a water bottle. He spoke softly. "I feared this would never reach court. Now, I can breathe." Renee looked at him, a faint smile. "We didn't win, Mr. Pierce," Mary did. That afternoon, the state issued an official statement. The state of Oklahoma indicts Richard Samuel Kane, 76, for first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. If convicted, he faces life imprisonment without parole. On that evening's news, the final image wasn't Kane's aged face, but Mary's old photo, the brown-haired girl, smiling gently in a summer dress. The ticker read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." Renee turned off the TV, sitting silently for a moment. In her personal investigation log, she wrote the final line, 43 years, 11 investigators, 3 generations of police, 1 technician who never gave up. And finally, justice has a name. Outside, dusk draped Oklahoma City in red-orange, like the Garvin County dirt where it all began. Thin raindrops fell on the window, mingling with distant car horns, the sound of a living city where at least one piece of the past had been brought to light. December 2013, winter came early to Oklahoma City. Snow blanketed the county courthouse steps, where State of Oklahoma versus Richard Samuel Kane began, a trial the media called the trial of 43 years of silence. Outside, dozens of reporters waited in the cold, lenses aimed at the heavy wooden door to courtroom 3. Inside, every seat was filled. In the front row, Detective Renee Wallace sat beside Alan Pierce, their eyes on the prosecution table, where Mary Ellen Carter's black and white photo stood on a wooden stand, next to a small vase of white flowers. Judge Eleanor Richards presided. As Richard Samuel Kane was escorted in, he wore a gray suit, hands trembling slightly, his cold gaze sweeping the courtroom. At 76, Kane no longer resembled the deputy of the 70s, but a closer look revealed the old arrogance, a man accustomed to giving orders, not receiving judgment. State Prosecutor Margaret Dwyer opened with a firm voice. "Your Honor, today we don't just try a man, but 43 years of lies. Scientific evidence, testimony, and records prove Richard Kane abused his police badge to deceive a young woman, kill her, and bury the crime at the bottom of Lake Arbuckle." The room fell silent. Dwyer continued, "I will present the evidence in order. First, DNA and mDNA results. Second, physical evidence from the scene. Third, radio log and patrol records. And finally, witness James Brantley's testimony." She held up a thick file, opening to the first page, OSBA's DNA analysis. DNA from the victim's driver's seat matches the sample from Kane's toothbrush collected during surveillance. Probability of random match, 1 in 23 trillion. At the defense table, attorney Frank Hensley, a heavy-set man with a calm voice, stood to object. "Your Honor, this is aged DNA, submerged for over 40 years. Its reliability, at minimum, requires re-examination. mDNA cannot definitively identify an individual." Judge Richards nodded. Allowing the rebuttal, Dwyer called Dr. Clara Matthews, OSBA's chief forensic scientist, to the stand. In a white lab coat, her voice was clear. "True, it's aged DNA, but we used mitochondrial DNA sequencing, enabling maternal lineage tracing. The mDNA matched Kane's son, then was corroborated by nuclear DNA from household trash, matching the car sample 100%. This isn't just a lineage match, it's an individual match." Hensley asked, "Can you confirm no one else among millions of Americans could share this DNA?" Clara replied calmly, "The odds of a random match are 1 in 23 trillion. Earth's population is less than a third of that." The courtroom murmured. The judge banged her gavel. "Order." Dwyer moved to the chain of physical evidence. Images flashed on a large screen. The police jacket with dried blood, found in Kane's home. The forensic report appeared. DNA matches Mary Ellen Carter. White paint on the sleeve matches the victim's Chevrolet Nova. The prosecutor said, "This is the jacket he kept for 43 years. He didn't discard it, didn't turn it in, just hid it in a closet. Because it wasn't just a memento, it was evidence of power, something he thought no one would dare touch." Hensley stood. "Your Honor, the jacket could have picked up blood during duty, possibly from another victim. There's no direct evidence of violence." Dwyer turned, replying sharply, "No other victim matches Mary Carter's DNA. No case reported blood on his uniform in July 1970. Only one person went missing, and her blood is on his collar." The jury, 12 members, 7 men, 5 women, sat silently, eyes fixed on the jacket image on the screen. On the third day's afternoon, the prosecution presented the radio log from July 18th. An audio technician had restored the 1970 Garvin County tape, displaying a graph of the signal gap from 7:42 to 9:03 p.m. The period Kane's car radio was silent aligns exactly with when Mary Ellen Carter left the diner and vanished. Dwyer said, "This wasn't a technical glitch, it was manually disabled. He didn't want anyone knowing where he was." The defense attorney rose, voice louder. "There's no direct proof Mr. Kane turned off the radio." Dwyer replied coldly, "He was the only one in the car." On the fourth day, witness James Brantley, now 72, was led in. He leaned on a cane, stepped slow but steady. After swearing in, Dwyer asked, "Do you recall the night of July 18, 1970? Brantley nodded, voice raspy. "I do. I saw car lights by the lake. A man in a police uniform and a young woman with brown hair," he yelled. "Then there was a crash. I heard water, then silence." "Do you recognize that man in this courtroom today?" Brantley scanned the room, then pointed a trembling finger. "That's him, Richard Kane." A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. During cross-examination, Hensley asked, "Mr. Brantley, it's been 43 years. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Brantley replied, eyes locked on Kane, "Some faces you don't forget, especially when they carry a gun and tell you to shut up. I've been silent too long." Kane sat motionless, his gaze darkening. No more smile. On the final afternoon, Dwyer closed with a brief, chilling statement. Mary Ellen Carter had no chance to escape. The man she trusted, a uniformed officer, a symbol of the law, took her life and a town's trust. Justice comes late, but it comes. Today, I ask the jury to say what every piece of evidence has said: guilty. Attorney Hensley stood, voice subdued. "No one denies this pain, but no evidence proves Mr. Kane pushed that car into the lake. Science can err, memories can fade, and time can distort everything. Don't let emotion replace evidence." Judge Richards signaled the jury to retire for deliberation. Outside, snow fell lightly, blurring the glass windows. Renee sat silently, heart racing as it had when she first held the case file. 7 hours passed. At 9:17 p.m., the jury returned. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman, stood, holding a trembling paper. "We, the jury, having considered all evidence, testimony, and arguments, find the defendant Richard Samuel Kane guilty, first-degree murder." A collective exhale swept the courtroom, like wind after a storm. Kane bowed his head, silent. Renee closed her eyes, tears spilling without her realizing. Pierce gripped her hand, whispering, 43 years, and she just heard her verdict. Judge Richards banged her gavel, voice resounding. Sentence pronounced, life imprisonment without parole. Court adjourned. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the courthouse steps. Renee paused on the steps, looking up at the falling flakes. In the cold wind, she heard Pierce's voice echo. "Justice moves slowly, but it keeps walking." And for the first time since the case began, Renee allowed herself to believe Mary Ellen Carter had finally come home. The story of the Mary Ellen Carter case is not just a personal tragedy, it's a profound reflection of modern America, where justice may arrive late, but never vanishes. In today's society, As trust in the legal system and law enforcement faces challenges, this case reminds us that accountability, transparency, and persistence in seeking truth remain the foundation of justice. In 1970, Oklahoma, a deputy sheriff tasked with protecting citizens was the one who abused his power to conceal a crime. But 43 years later, forensic science, the determination of people like Detective Renee Wallace and Alan Pierce, and faith in justice brought the case to light. In today's America, as communities grapple with issues of authority abuse, discrimination, and unresolved cases, the message of the Carter file resonates strongly. Never deem a case old, only truths yet unheard. The lesson for us, whether police, citizens, or observers, is to dare to question and take responsibility. If technician Alan Pierce hadn't noted his suspicions in 1970, if OSBI hadn't valued an old DNA sample, Mary would still be a name on a forgotten report. In an era where misinformation, bias, and power can obscure truth, Americans must remember that justice doesn't come on its own. It must be pursued, preserved, and protected daily. At the story's end, as Dawn reflects on Lake Arbuckle, we see not just a case's closure, but a reminder that truth can be buried, but not buried alive. Thank you for following this story to its end. A 40-plus-year journey of justice, where truth was finally named. If you believe no case is truly closed until justice is served, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next videos.